Yeah, I can see it.
All right, cool. We're live.
It's working.
Okay, great. So finally, after a bunch of configuration on my end, we're live with the Dallas Design Sprints podcast. I believe this is number 65, but I'll go back and change it if it's not. I can even edit the audio. Joining me today is Alexia Van Schaardenburg. I know I didn't say that right, but that's okay.
It's fine.
All right, it'll work. She's the head of Pragmatic Giraffe. She's been doing that for over 4 years. She coaches and trains corporate teams and small startups and businesses on business modeling, design, customer understanding, metrics, and growth management. Previous to that, she's been an entrepreneurial coach. And the reason why I wanted to have her come on the podcast is because a lot of the comments that I've seen from her on LinkedIn and the conversations we've had about design thinking, empathy, in that spectrum have been really interesting, and I thought she would be just a really interesting guest to bring on to kind of ask a lot of questions in that space. So thank you very much for joining me today, Alexia. What I'd like to do, and by the way, I'm glad I don't have an Alexa next to me, because this would be really problematic if I kept on saying your name wrong and that kept on popping up. So I'm glad that that isn't the case. But Alexia, why don't you give your own short introduction on who you are, what you're all about, and fill in the blanks of things that I may have forgotten when I did my introduction.
So I think your introduction was pretty thorough. I would say what I'm all about is simplifying complexity and asking a lot of questions on why we're doing this and shouldn't it be simpler. And I've also been told, because I also try to understand what value I deliver. So I keep asking, clients and other people I work with, okay, what is it that I do? And they always say, okay, you structure things and you always put people first, in the sense that I like frameworks, I like processes, but what I'm all about is simplifying process, like making people apply the process. So it's all about applying things. Otherwise, the theory for me, I don't care how intelligent it is, and also making sure that it takes the people from where they are. So it's meet you where you are, and then we'll move on. So it's very, in a way, human centric or customer centric, which is and the giraffe comes from the fact that it sees very far because of the long neck. But it also stoops. If you look at it when it drinks water, it goes all the way down, because I'm very, very practical. Like, I want to see things applied, and that's why it's called a pragmatic giraffe.
Now, I have to ask you the question since it's in your profile. Do you know if giraffes like dark chocolate, or is it something they cannot have?
I have no idea.
Yeah, because I've fed giraffes before at zoos here in the States, and I know they eat a lot of vegetables, but I've never tried to slip in like a Toblerone or any kind of like dark chocolate to see if they work. But
I don't think they would. It's probably not very good for them.
I would probably get a tongue lashing, because they do have really long tongues and
Yes.
probably spit back in my face. So yeah, I'm glad I've never tried that before. So explain to everyone that's listening and watching on YouTube, what kind of work have you been doing lately? What have you been getting yourself involved with?
So in the last 3 years, I've been working with a large corporation that's using basically what's called lean enterprise, which is lean startup applied to the corporate world to transform. And I'm kind of a part-time member of their team in one of the countries, because it's a group. And as part of that, I've been able to experiment a lot of things. First, we applied the framework as it was designed originally. Then we started testing. And of course, as the maturity of teams and the organization evolved, I've always been looking for, okay, we run into this problem, how do we fix it? We run into that problem, how do we fix it? And so I came from a very theoretical, okay, I've read Running Lean, which is, Ash Maurya lean canvas approach. I basically improvised using an empathy map. I improvised using everything. And I went from improvisation to running it, like a lot of experience with different teams, running into almost always the same problems, and starting to say, okay, now we understand what the lean startup aspect is, almost the easiest one. How do we fix speed? How do we fix people not being able to work in teams? How do we fix complexity, like the challenge not being clear? And so it's almost like it being an experiment ground. And then on the other side, I've also always been in contact with some startups and basically seeing that it's always the same. Everybody runs into the same problems. Everybody rushes to the solution. Nobody wants to think about what it is they're really trying to solve. It's much, much more fun to get all excited about, yeah, it has AI and it speaks and it has all these, all the features, but it can send you on a wild goose. And I've also always tried to apply it to myself. So I eat my own dog food. I do empathy maps of my clients. I do customer interview. I've done customer journeys to my own business. It's really hard to do it to yourself, but I still do it and I still find the value. And that's what I like about all these tools, is that they work on almost anything, which is sometimes people don't believe it. Like, how can you apply to a startup or to a small business, to a corporate? But I mean, I listened to, there was a podcast, a video interview from Osterwalder on Friday. I forgot the name of the podcast. And he said the same. He said, a lot of these tools were designed to apply to everyone. And so basically, the more you apply it, whether it's on teams, entrepreneurial teams, or startups or small business, the more you learn. And then I got interested in the design thinking aspect because I knew less of it. And I started to learn a little bit about this. And then it now becomes a virtuous circle. So I don't know if that answered your question.
It answered it in the most eloquent and involved way that I could ever have hoped to answer a question. So you're good. My one question immediately is, what kind of tools do you tend to use with your work?
In what sense?
The types of approaches, like say you mentioned lean and design thinking. I'm sure it depends on context, but are there particular tools or approaches to your work that you find yourself?
So, because I'm currently trying to streamline everything that's being done in this team, and I was thinking, okay, what are the 3 things people need to know? And over I've run about 50 projects now, all in the marketing and sales space. So it is not design, it's not IT, it's marketing, sales, some finance, some HR. So it's across the whole organization. And what they basically need is something to frame the problem. So we have something called the business challenge canvas, which is a blend of OKRs and problem framing and problem statement. It's like we made it up and we tweaked it. And then we use the Dave Gray's empathy map, the last version. And that this has been a huge increase in quality from the other personas that we used. You see people's face change when they go through the empathy map. At the beginning, when they start filling it, like there's numbers in there, and they start filling in the goal and who it is, it's all very artificial, and they talk about the person like it was some kind of character in a book. And by the time they get to the say and do, you can see literally on their face that they now see that person either physically in their head, or you can really feel what the person is saying, and then you start getting the granularity. And so that was like excellent tool. So the empathy map. Then the one that's really about lean startup is assumption mapping from David Bland. That I've basically used from the beginning. And I think it's one of the most powerful and simple tool there is. So it's basically a 2 thing. It's a matrix, which is basically you list all the assumptions. And then you say, okay, how do we know it's true, or is it unknown? And how much impact does it have on what we're trying to do? Like how bad is it if we get it wrong? How screwed are we? So it basically does a 4x4, and then he refines it, and because you ensure that you have desirability, feasibility, and viability included in these. And so that's the 3rd thing, I think, the 4th thing, which is the 3 circles: desirability, viability, and feasibility. I use all the time, because whether you're a startup or whether you're an entrepreneurial team, they always start with feasibility. It's not their fault. There's nothing wrong with it, but they shouldn't be stuck in there. And so our job has always been with the team I work with, my job has always been to remember, okay, what about desirability? And even when they do desirability, they always miss the viability. So that's those 3 little circles. They look very innocent, but they're very powerful. And if you only have those and some kind of visual representation, so like a user map, a customer journey, some form of visualization of the sequence of events you want to happen, then you're good.
So to recap, you're saying that there's 3 dimensions or 3 steps. There's frame the problem with the business challenge canvas. There's
Yep.
Dave Graves' empathy map, and that's Gray as Gray, correct?
Yeah, the explain guy.
And then
Innovation game.
yep. And then there's assumption mapping by David Bland,
Yep.
to kind of make sure that everyone understands what they're kind of taking for granted versus what's practical.
Yes.
And all those are meant to measure desirability, viability, and feasibility. You mentioned user map, but I'm wondering, are there any other artifacts? Like, say, if you go through all three of those exercises, what are some of the artifacts that you've seen come out of those where they're actionable, where they're next steps, like things that companies and the executives can kind of take forward from what they've done?
So the outputs from there are usually, so you get a persona, obviously with the empathy map, but we usually mix the empathy map with some form of visualization of the current state. So that's, as I said, it's a user map. I don't really know how to call it because I looked at different things and I mix and match. So it has swim lanes, but with all the different stakeholders, sometimes we have swim lanes with like pains and needs. It really depends, but a visual representation of either the problem or the current state is a really powerful thing to move forward, because I don't do a lot of, I mostly work on core innovation. So it's more about optimization and innovation, within the current business model than like revolution. But to just have it's more about, so what's interesting about all these tools is that a lot of what they do is also alignment amongst the people in the team, which is not their core purpose. Their purpose is to, identify assumptions, to be clear who the customer is, but it also helps people align, because particularly in large corporations, people are used to have a lot of meetings. They're talking buzzwords, but they don't actually understand each other. And so it helps a lot to make the implicit explicit. And so the outputs are, it's really, number one is alignment, clarity, because they then talk about the same guy or the same girl with a set of issues or a set of needs. And then they have the same understanding of the messiness or the simplicity of the current situation, or at least if they don't have a full understanding, they know where it's messy. So these would be the outputs. And then from this, you would then go into some form of solution ideation. But that's always, in my experience, this has always been the easiest piece. Like the ideation is always easy because it's getting to that place where the problem statement is clean, like it's clean enough that it doesn't turn on its own and generates things you already know. Don't know if that's very clear.
And are you involved with that solution ideation, or is that where you're, okay?
So no, yeah, we do. I go all the way to the solution, and then we basically try and what you call it, prototype it. I mean, I used to say prototype it, but now I know it's prototype it. So we would go and test the riskiest assumptions in the solution. So there again, you get assumption mapping, like, okay, what's risky, what's unknown, what should you test first, what's fastest to learn, and then if you haven't done a persona, then you would do it later. So the persona it's not like there's a sequence. The only thing you do at the beginning is you need to frame what it is you're trying to do, which is kind of obvious. You have to agree on what it is you're going to be working on. And then the tools that you get out depend on at what stage you're at. I mean, I've had teams who already had a solution, and it was all about, okay, how do we make sure the options are adjusted? And then it's more about testing options. So it's more like a test and learn, which is more of an agile approach. And we've had situations where there was no solution, or there was too many options, and it was like, okay, let's go back to the drawing board. What should be the solution? Let's build it back up. And then if we find the same thing, then we're good.
Do you find that the exercises that you had mentioned earlier, as well as like the outputs, the persona empathy map, the visual representation of the problem, do you find that the core purpose of all of that is basically to make sure that everyone's on the same page and aligned?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And then basically once you're done with that, the prototype or the prototype that you get involved with is its own animal, meaning that at this point you've done a bridge where you're actually starting to do the rubber hitting the road, and you are now in a different phase where you're actually seeing what seems to represent the market that you want to serve.
Yeah, exactly. I think the complexity goes down when you get to the solution, which sounds maybe counterintuitive, but it's this alignment that's really important. And also, even when they have solutions, so sometimes we had situations where the teams comes and they come and they say, we have this solution, and then we don't understand where the solution fits. So we say, okay, let's back up, explain to me where you're coming from, let's review it from the start. And then they realize, because we get them to do some kind of process map of the current state, they realize that the solution's either in the wrong sequence, it's too late or too early, or maybe they should look at a different moment for the solution. So it's really the iterative aspect that you see in lean startup, right? You constantly go back and you say, okay, this is not clear, let's go back. And we also see that people have a tendency to rush to the solution. And I'm always the annoying person who goes, okay, but this is not like, how well do you understand your consumer needs? Because you've got like 65 actions you want to do now. It's all very fine plan, but what about the customer you're trying to serve? I mean, how well do you understand their expected behaviors or the behavior you expect them to have once you have a solution? And almost always they don't understand. And that's where we send them back and we say, okay, go and find out either past behavior, because you can't predict future behavior. And this is where we also run into these cultural issues, because people want to do surveys. And I explain to them, no, you don't do surveys, you ask questions. It's you collect like anecdotes, stories, use cases. And at the beginning, they're very, it's quite difficult for them, because I come from the market research world from my past experience. So, I mean, surveys have a purpose, but nowadays doing a simulated sale, any kind of smoke test or A/B testing is so much more powerful, and you can learn so much faster, that you should really keep surveys for a very, very, very limited amount of cases where you cannot access these people, it's so complicated, or you really need statistical stuff. But in most cases, talking to 5 humans is way more powerful than sending some form to a faceless group of people and getting feedback. And this is the same for startups. Like so many startups post on groups that I'm in, and I'm always sending them an article I wrote, which is basically how market research will fail your business, because you're putting people into slots too early, right? You're already putting them through a funnel, so you're assuming a lot of things. Whereas if you were talking to 5 people, you would probably learn much more, and then it would refine your understanding.
Sometimes I don't even think that it's really being annoying personally. Like you say that you may mention that you may have that tack or may have that approach, but really what you're doing is asking interesting questions. So,
yeah, but you can. I kind of, it's a gesture, right? I kind of say I'm annoying you now, because I know that like their tendency is to go with what they've been trained to do, rewarded to do. So that's where the culture shift happens, right? You basically have to tell them, I know you want to do this, but you're going to have to do something else. And I know you don't like it, but that's why I rather put the pain on me and say, I'm the one that's forcing you to eat the spinach because you want the chocolate, but you have to do the spinach. But it's kind of a trick, right? Because I realize it's not easy. And I'm the same, right? I'd rather go and talk about solutions than go and really survey my customers and understand. Even if it's interesting, it's scarier than building stuff. So it's dealing with the fear that's basically, well, that's at the heart of all these tools. It's like a way of avoiding the fear, managing the fear, slicing the fear. So that's why there's a human element, which I really think is right now undervalued or kind of put under the carpet, because people say, okay, we have all the frameworks and all the process and we have all these wonderful tools, it will all be fine. But it's not. And it's not because the tools are wrong. It's because it's very hard to change. It's hard to change your habits. It's hard to face something that you don't know, to take risks, and telling people it's okay to fail. It's like logical thinking, but it doesn't work, right? If I tell you don't be scared of the spider, when you're scared of a spider, it doesn't work. And it's the same for anything that's new.
And I was going to touch on the topic of empathy that you had mentioned before. When you've worked with your clients, how have you seen your work impacting culture, like impacting their culture there about how they see their problems?
I think it helps them Yeah, you're always stuck between, you want to shake them up because you can see that if they don't change the way they do things, they're going to do more of the same, and your job is for them to do different. But you also don't want to traumatize them, because if you push too much, then this is where I always say I have to apply empathy myself, because I also have to understand that, you know, some of them are stuck with a manager that doesn't get it, or they have numbers that they have to meet, and then there's so much change you can do at a given time. So that's why I try and slice it and saying, okay, what could we change right now? So I don't go for a big bang, because I think very few people accept this or are able. And you see this in when you work with teams. You have one person in the team who's instantly like a fan, and they want to do everything, and they're ready to do everything, and they adopt it immediately. But most people need more time, and they need more time for different things. And I think that's normal. But I've seen when I was working with in a team of other people like me, some of them were getting frustrated because they were like, yeah, but they don't understand. They're just corporates, and they're so slow, and they're so and I'm like, people, you know, like, you have to think where we're coming from. Like, this is hard. And it sounds like very, I don't know, maybe, yeah, I think sometimes we forget that it's another person in front of you, and that person has its own speed. And I'm pretty fast, but I've learned to slow down and really say, okay, so I can see that this person needs to go over there, but they're not going to go there at my speed. They need their speed. So what can I throw them? Like, what bones can I throw them so that they go in the right direction? And that also makes it interesting, because you have to think every time of different solutions, because different people will need different things. Some people you can motivate by saying, oh yeah, you know, this is really exciting, and they like the fact that it's new. And other people like the efficiency. So they like the fact that, you know, they have a nice Kanban at the end. Not that I'm obsessed with Kanbans, but you know, that they have a different no, but because I'm introducing a lot of different things, where I'm introducing customer centricity, empathy, working as a team, alignment. We try and introduce I try and introduce basic agile principles. And I'm not an agile coach, but I'm so I'm a bit like MacGyver, right? I take different things from different frameworks, and I try, and if it works, it works. And it's applying it as we go. And it's always custom made, but there's a general trend, which is, okay, let's work where you are, and let's baby step it. And sometimes I push them when I think, okay, they can do better, then I push them.
But not physically
long
push
answer.
them. You literally like mentally push them. Like I would hate to think that you're in a room like shoving people, going, no, you have to look at this.
No, I've never done this.
Okay, just
no, I'm known to use very unusual metaphors. So, you know, I tell them it's like dating, because there's a lot of things that you use normal life as an illustration of what you're trying to do. You know, like it's when you because when they do customer interview, I said, well, when you're on a date, you don't come with a questionnaire, right? Because they're scared to go out and interview people. And
yeah.
And I don't train them to interview. Like, I don't take hours to explain to them. They don't have to read the MUMS test. Like, no. I say, you have a brain. You know how to ask questions to your friends. So let's just decide on the intention of your conversation, or what it is that you want to find out. Like, what kind of story are you interested in? And then your brain will provide. And I've had discussion with UX designers or people like, yeah, but they don't know how to interview, and they don't have the right and they're influencing, and they open close questions. This is all true. They do all these things. But I think it's better that they do this, that they don't do anything, which is why I'm a pragmatist. And even with imperfect questions, close questions, very narrow focus, they still learn so much more than sitting at their desk, that it's worth it. And then some of them really enjoy it, and of course they get better. And the ones who want to get better, they can find a lot of resources. So I'm also all about, you know, teach to fish. Like, I want people to figure out what works for them. And I think it's much more sustainable in the long term, that I don't want to be a guru of anything. Like, that has no interest for me. I want to have people become, I have to become obsolete. So if I'm not obsolete, then I've done something wrong.
So how do you share your work? How do you share what your learnings or what your company's doing?
So my problem is I'm very, very, very bad at documenting. So, so I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, all these people who document all their design sprints and all their experiments. And I saw you did this. And there's a guy in Lyon called Fabrice Lutte. I think you've met him. He documents everything. I'm really bad at this. I have a very good memory. So I used to rely on my memory because I remember a lot of things. But of course, now with age and everything, it's not as, I have to basically write things down, but I'm not in the habit of this. So I have to find a solution. I have to do some kind of mini design sprint on my problem to figure it out.
Well, coming from a 50-year-old, I can tell you that it just takes practice. Yeah. It's a matter of exercising your social media muscle to do more activities in this space. And I will say that there's never been a better time in human history to promote yourself, especially on LinkedIn, with the organic reach is absolutely crazy. So if you can carve out at least 2 to 3 hours per week to essentially not even, you don't even have to write full articles. It can be something that is just a mindful quote, or it's something that you learned in a recent business involvement with a company in terms of how you approach a method. There's different ways of doing it where it doesn't have to be as taxing to your time, but I wholeheartedly recommend it.
Yeah, so I do. I mean, I've written some article in the past. There's one that was on Medium. It's old now. It's like, it's love that kills small businesses. And it's a whole metaphor about, when you're in love, everything's perfect, and you disregard all the warnings and you disregard all the differences. And it's effectively the metaphor for when you have a solution or a business idea, you do the same, right? You do not want to validate or invalidate. And that has been quite good. I have, in the past, the last couple of months, shared some visuals. So I'm not very good at, I'm not a drawer. Like, I'm a drawer because I like to show visual things, but I really suck at actual art. But it was been super interesting because I share my very DIY diagrams, and that gets a lot of interest and a lot of traction. And again, because it's super simple. Like, there was one which is like a very squiggly thing of, this is a very big hairy problem, and then what we do is we slice it into several problems and we pick one, and for this one we find solutions. And this is what innovation should be. It should be about slicing problems into manageable pieces rather than getting all obsessed about a solution. Mm-hmm. And so things like this, that's easy, but I'm not good at habits. So I have to, I do meditation, but it takes a lot of prompting. I do it every day.
Meditation is not going to get you the attention you need. It'll definitely give you
but what I mean is I've managed to get into that habit, but it's taken me a long time. So yes, but yeah, you remind me that I have to do it. I have to find some kind of system. Apparently I'm a questioner according to Gretchen Rubin, so I have to find out what I should do.
I would always recommend somebody that that's good at that, and that you can actually partner with, and you don't necessarily have to put it into your mix, but it can be an extension of who you are, saying, hey, if you have some time, can you do this? And you could be a service exchange. It could be something where they can learn from you, where you fill in what they don't do well. There's plenty of possibilities. But I mean, on one piece of Post-it note, I can see easily at least 20 or 30 pieces of content you could create from this. Just even parsing out the 3-step process and kind of making it into a multi-step series, just tons of different things you could do. And the great thing is that if you do decide to do that, it will showcase your thinking to other people who don't know who you are.
I know all of the benefits. It's just, I was thinking maybe I do videos because then that's quite easy for me. I don't care if I'm on video or not. So that's an advantage, but that actually is harder because it requires that you condense everything into 2 minutes. And by the time I've condensed it, I guess it's not that I'm bored, but it's just, I don't know. I have to think about it, but that's good advice.
You could, and even though TikTok right now is a platform that has clips of sports teams and gaming and people dancing around. It is going to mature and it is going to evolve. So I've seen people in this space start to do Q&A, like 1 minute Q&A, or like the really, really small kind of like engagement part of it. And it works well with them because even though they have nascent traffic, it's the start of getting into the habit of doing it. So whatever you do decide to do, forward it to me because I'd love to see it when you start finding the time or you find the mechanism to do it.
Yeah, that's a good advice.
I'll be your biggest fan.
Thank you.
So you mentioned startups before, and I want to touch upon this briefly. How do you find the work you do different from startups versus traditional enterprise companies? How do you tend to approach each differently?
Startups are way harder to help because they're more stubborn and less disciplined. So they don't listen to you. No, I'm kidding, but it's actually true and it's normal. But it's funny because at the beginning where you can get their interest when they're starting out and they're thinking about their project because you help them. They have a lot of things in their head and it's all over the place. And so by just saying something like do a lean canvas, like, which again is a very innocent looking piece of paper, but every time, by the time they're on the second box, they already realize there's something that they should change on the first box. And so the value is already delivered to them just by them looking at it. But so that's the almost easy piece. But then they don't like the next piece, which is checking what's on that piece of paper. So they usually disappear. And then you get other startups which already have customers. And I think you can interest them when they have a problem that they need solving, which is quite logical. I worked with an Israeli cybersecurity startup with the French representative who wanted to put it in the French market, and they were organizing. They were coming to a trade fair, like a cybersecurity trade fair, and it was super interesting because by working with him, I made him realize that you could use a trade fair as a giant problem interview event. So we basically, instead of running these basic demos of let's take everybody who comes to our stand and run them through a 30-minute demo, and then let's hope there's a customer in there. They changed it to, okay, make it the access to the demo is conditions to you answering like a 15-minute interview so that we can qualify who you are. Because I said your objective is to repel as many people from the stand as you could. So I think it was like, what is this crazy lady telling me? But it actually worked because, they had these two engineers from Israel. They had very, very specific conversations with the people who actually survived the 15-minute interview, because the interview was all about, what are your challenges? And they got to the people who really were interested in the solution because they had a problem to solve. The existing solution didn't work. So like textbook problem interview. But it was funny because it took him a bit of, you can see at the beginning, he was like, what do you mean I have to repel people? And I'm like, go and do a problem interview on anything like holiday picking with somebody and practice. And he's like me, he's super talkative. So doing an interview is really hard because we don't like shutting up. And we don't. No, but I mean, I'm super interested. When people talk, I'm very interested, but it's very hard not to say anything. So, but he had the same experience, and just doing a random interview on a random topic made him shift his mindset to, okay, so actually I see what you mean. And eventually it got them to a very narrow list of customers, but they're all very qualified. And then I think they disappeared into the sunset. So you can get them when they have a problem. But I haven't really been pursuing startups because in France, they get too much money from the States. So they don't pay for anything. But I still, from time to time, if I find a startup that I find what they do interesting, then I offer to help them as, pro bono out of interest, and then we work from there.
So my final question for the interview is, with the coronavirus starting to become more and more prevalent in today's markets and in people's minds, how do you see what you do being projected into the remote or the virtual world? Have you already made that adjustment? Have you been working in that space?
Yeah. So I work, 80% of my work is remote because I go to the teams. Then right now the teams I work mostly when I'm in Belgium. So I go there once a month, but the rest of the time I do it on Zoom. I've done additional training on how to do remote facilitation. I mean, I sort of improvise a lot of things myself. I have an iPad that I connect to Zoom as a whiteboard, so I use that a lot. Did some experiments with Miro and Zoom, some remote kickoff. So I definitely think this is the way to go. I think I need to find better ways. I even found, I don't know if you know the Meeting Owl, which is very, very good tool. My client just got it this week, so I have to try it. But
it's Meeting Owl, all one
as
word.
in the animal.
Okay.
Ow, ow, ooh.
Well, yeah, I got that. I was just figuring the spelling, but if you'd like to have the sound effect to make sure that people really resonate with that reference, then yes. Is it just owl.com or is it Meeting Owl?
I think it's called Meeting Owl.
Okay.
It was Lisette Sutherland. I don't know if you know her, who recommended this. Because she's like a remote work expert, and I attended one of their workshops, which is really good. It was telling you all different tools about facilitation. You discover about breakout rooms in Zoom, but I never realized there were any. It teaches you a lot of the different things, and it's also how to transfer in the room facilitation to remote facilitation, and how to deal with these awful hybrid meetings, because I do a lot of hybrid meetings with 6 people in a room, 1 person remote and me remote. That's quite hard, but once you manage this, then almost everything else is easier. So I definitely think it's going to be growing, and actually I was interested to see what would be the behavior changes of companies these days with all these restrictions for travel, because they must be looking for solutions.
The ones that I'm talking to are in full-blown panic.
Yeah, because they're not used to it.
They remote and virtual have always been a nice to have. They've been convenient. Now that it's becoming more and more of, it's looking like it's becoming more mandatory. They're not prepared. They're just, they're not built for it. And it's a business vulnerability that a lot of them don't know how to bridge. And that's where a lot of what we do comes into play.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I was interested in also everything you do online, because I heard about the virtual design sprint from the beginning, but I couldn't really participate. And I was curious from the beginning for that reason. I was like, okay, this is like a 5-day thing that you do online with this like Post-it Fest. How are you going to convert a Post-it Fest onto an online tool? And I'm still very curious to find out, because I will participate this time.
Yep, I just announced it today, so that it's happening for 3 weeks. So
I saw.
It's basically May 4th to the 22nd. And if 1 week doesn't work for you, you can always sign up for a different one, and you can participate as much as you want. So yeah, it's pretty much in that vein. Plus, that you might appreciate this, or this might be of interest to you, is that we're allowing participants to kind of frame out or design their own sprints. So it's not just going to be the basic formula. It can pretty much take and leverage your experience and your approach to doing things and incorporate that into the mix, so that these become actually customized processes that go after sponsored challenges or ones that are curated by the team. So that should be interesting to see when it all plays out. Yeah,
that would be super good learning. No, I'm all for the classic vintage style design.
Nothing wrong with the classics. My grandmother would agree with that. Yes, there's nothing wrong with those. So Alexia, if people wanted to find out more about you online, where would they go?
The easiest is LinkedIn.
Okay, they don't have to bother with anything else. They just look up.
Yeah, because most of my articles on Medium are on LinkedIn. I also have a Medium account where I think, yes, it's basically duplicated.
Now, if you're looking to find her online, just to make sure that we have your last name spelled right, it's SCHAARDENBURG. Yep. And that's pretty much a lock in terms of trying to find her along with Alexia. And you can also copy and paste the description from the podcast as well as the YouTube channel.
And people also use Pragmatic Giraffe, because now I have people calling, oh, it's you, it's the giraffe. So it's just because it's easier than my name.
As long as they're just referencing your company and not you personally. Oh, you're the giraffe. No, my company's the giraffe. I'm not the giraffe.
Yeah, well,
I'm the expert behind the brand. So
yes.
And as I'm assuming, when does the dark, and I have to ask, when does the dark chocolate come into play? Is it when you first meet people as part of a greeting thing, or is it part of your workshops? When does it tend to kind of go into the mix?
Oh, it just fuels my brain. So it's a self-serving habit. It's only for me, but I'm happy to share.
So your tell is that when you're getting into something really muddy or really complex, it's like you're going, and then you hear the unwrapping, and here comes the dark chocolate in the hand, which you have to eat while you're thinking, and then, you know, the squinty eyes, and I get it.
Well,
So,
you
hey,
can see me in workshops. This is what happens. People go on breaks. Some smoke, some do other stuff, and I eat my chocolate.
well, if you're powering down some chocolate in between breaks, then I know you're in a particularly intense workshop. I'll
Exactly.
appreciate that all the same.
Yeah.
So Alexia, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you have a great week.
Yeah, it was super interesting. Thanks, Robert.